Mali is not dying from the sound of gunfire. It is dying from silence, from roads strangled, convoys reduced to skeletons of steel, fuel trucks exploding like torches in the desert night. A blockade has become the real weapon, choking Bamako's lifelines, suffocating the nation's pulse. Children cry not from bullets, but from empty plates. Families walk past burned highways with nothing but fear in their eyes. This is not war as you know it. This is a siege against breath itself. And yet, against this storm, Mali dares to rise. What you will hear next changes everything. In August alone, more than 800 lives were lost across Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Al-Qaeda's branch in the Sahel, JNIM, tightened its grip, blocking highways, torching fuel trucks, kidnapping drivers from Senegal, and forcing companies to shut down. Images flooded social media, black smoke spiraling above burned convoys, armed men patrolling checkpoints. The lifeline between Bamako and Ségou strangled to silence. Some analysts warned, it is not the government, but Al-Qaeda, that now rules the roads. For Mali, this was not just insecurity. It was suffocation. But in the middle of fear, soldiers chose another answer. And their answer was to fight back. K's. To the world, it is a land of gold, a western gateway to Mali where the earth itself seems to shine. But to Malians, K's is more than treasure. It is a front line, where prosperity meets peril. Where every grain of gold is shadowed by the echo of gunfire. The story of K's is not written in contracts or mining reports. It is written in blood on the roads that wind through the Sahel. In the fear etched into the faces of drivers who dare to carry fuel, food, or medicine into the city. In recent months, K's became a theater of horror. Al-Qaeda's affiliate JNIM extended its reach westward. Targeting foreign and local businesses, ambushing trucks, and declaring control of territory that does not belong to them. Families heard explosions in the night and wondered if their loved ones would ever return. Gold miners dug by day, but at dusk, the roads were no longer theirs. They belonged to terror. One report tells of fuel convoys intercepted near Diama. Fighters set vehicles ablaze. Black smoke filling the horizon, while hostages were dragged into the bush. These images spread like wildfire on social media, convincing many that K's had fallen, that the government was absent. That the west of Mali was no longer under the flag of Bamako. But that is only half the story. The other half begins with a voice, Colonel Baba Bokum, commander of Defense Zone 4. Who issued a simple but electrifying directive, patrol without rest. Patrol until the people can breathe again. From that command, the streets of K's began to change. Joint patrols, soldiers, police, gendarmes, and special units, fanned out across a 20 to 30 kilometer radius, weaving through villages, forests, and highways. Their presence was not ceremonial. It was a declaration. To the terrorists, it said, "You will not own this land." To the people, it whispered, "You are not alone." Day after day, convoys of FAMa vehicles rolled through dusty roads. Engines roaring like drums of defiance. At checkpoints, soldiers greeted drivers, inspected loads, and cleared the way. Merchants who once feared the journey now testified that the route between Bamako and Ségou was open. Steady, and safe again. Public testimonies poured in, not scripted, not polished, but raw, women saying they could walk to the market without fear, children waving at soldiers as trucks rumbled by. K's was still dangerous. Ambushes did not disappear overnight. But the balance of fear shifted. Terrorists who once operated openly were forced back into shadows. Businesses slowly reopened. Farmers returned to fields. Even gold, once tainted by blood, began to symbolize resilience. This was not just about guns and uniforms. It was about psychology. Terror had thrived because people believed the state was absent. By appearing every day, every night, FAMa reversed that perception. Presence became power. Visibility became sovereignty. And sovereignty is contagious. Neighboring regions began to call for the same intensity of patrols. Leaders in Bamako saw K's not as an isolated campaign but as a model. Could the same spirit be applied to Gao? To Kidal? To the corridors under siege? Still, the cost was heavy. Soldiers fell in clashes, families mourned, and communities bore scars that no patrol could immediately heal. But when mothers spoke of their sons in uniform, they no longer spoke with only grief. They spoke with pride, that their sacrifice allowed markets to open, roads to function, and children to walk without trembling. To walk through caves today is to feel a paradox. On one side, you sense the fragility, the roads could be blocked again, the gold fields could once more become battlegrounds. On the other side, you sense defiance, that even in fragility, Mali refuses surrender. This is what security looks like when painted by hands that know suffering. It is imperfect. It is fragile. But it is real. And as the sun sets on quays, the silhouettes of patrol trucks move against the horizon. They are not just machines of war. They are guardians of a promise, that the blockade will not define Mali, that fear will not have the final word. If you believe that the sacrifice in quays is not just for Mali, but for Africa's right to sovereignty, let your voice be heard. Share your thoughts. Because silence is what the enemy desires most, and silence is what Mali refuses to give. Kidal. To some, it is just a remote name on a map, a faraway region tucked deep into the Sahara. But for Mali, Kidal is more than sand and stone. It is a test of survival, a question of whether a nation can feed its people when enemies choke its lifelines. In the weeks when blockades tightened and highways fell silent, hunger became a weapon sharper than bullets. Markets emptied. Trucks carrying rice and cooking oil were stopped. Their cargo stolen or burned. Families began rationing meals, children went to bed with empty stomachs, and whispers spread that Kidal might be abandoned altogether. The terrorists of JNIM understood the cruel arithmetic: a nation can fight with guns. But it cannot fight without food. By strangling supply lines, they aimed not just to weaken the army, but to break the spirit of the people. For them, hunger was conquest. But in Gao, commanders of the Malian armed forces, FAMa, decided that surrendering the corridors was not an option. They knew that if Kidal starved, the whole nation would bleed. And so, they launched what some called a humanitarian offensive, a military campaign not measured in territory seized, but in bags of rice delivered. Convoys began rolling from Gao. Hundreds of tons of food and non-food supplies stacked high on trucks. Alongside them, FAMa vehicles rumbled, soldiers armed not only with rifles but with a mission, to make sure every sack reached its destination. The journey was perilous. Anafis, a small town on the way, had been a hotspot of ambushes. Terrorists lurked in dunes and wadis, waiting to strike. But this time, they found columns too well guarded. Too determined. Onlookers in villages watched with disbelief. They were used to convoys being stopped, burned, or turned back. Now, under the shield of soldiers, the trucks pressed forward. When they finally entered Kidal, it was as if breath returned to a suffocating chest. Markets reopened. Prices fell. Mothers wept as they carried flour into their homes. Children laughed around trucks, their voices rising above the hum of engines. This was more than logistics. It was politics. For years, critics had accused Bamako of abandoning the north, of leaving Kidal to foreign forces or insurgent control. But now, with FAMa securing every kilometer, the message was undeniable: the state is present. The army is here. You are not forgotten. Colonel after colonel spoke of this mission not as a charity, but as sovereignty in action. When we deliver food, one officer said, we deliver Mali. The symbolism was profound. Soldiers who had once been seen only as warriors were now also providers. Guns and grain traveled together, two sides of the same promise. And with every convoy, the bond between army and civilians deepened. Trust, once fractured, began to mend. Yet, the road remained dangerous. Every mile carried risk. Terrorists adjusted tactics, planting IEDs, spreading propaganda on radios that the army supplies were poisoned or stolen. They sought to twist generosity into suspicion. But the people had tasted relief, and once you taste hope, lies lose their power. International observers noted this operation with surprise. They were used to African armies being portrayed only as instruments of violence. Here, Mali's army was rewriting the script, showing that defense can also mean delivery, that sovereignty is not just borders but bread. In homes of Kidal, people spoke of soldiers differently. No longer just uniformed men from the south, they became protectors of daily life. They guarded children on their way to school. They opened roads for traders, they carried the weight of the nation's hunger on their trucks. This was not perfection. Supplies were never enough for every family. Distribution faced corruption, delays, and logistical nightmares. But against the backdrop of blockade, even imperfection was victory. A sack of rice in Kidal was worth 100 speeches in Bamako. And as convoys kept coming, something deeper took root. Terrorism feeds on separation, north versus south, civilians versus soldiers, people versus state. But every shared meal, every market reopened, was a blow to that narrative. Unity became the weapon. By the time the third and fourth convoys arrived, residents no longer whispered of abandonment. They whispered of resilience. They spoke of FAMa as our boys, of convoys as our lifeline. And in those whispers, Mali was reborn, not as a country divided by desert, but as a community stitched together by courage. So when analysts describe the Gao-Kidal corridor, they should not think only of roads or trucks. They should think of veins and blood, of breath and survival. For in that corridor lies the essence of Mali's struggle, to prove that sovereignty is not an abstract word in speeches, but food in the hands of the hungry. If you believe that sovereignty means not only defending borders but feeding people, then share your voice. Because in Kidal, every grain of rice carried the weight of a nation's future. Bamako, the capital, the heartbeat of Mali. If Kayes is the arm and Kidal the lung, then Bamako is the heart, and in recent months, that heart was strangled. The siege did not arrive with tanks at the gates. It arrived with silence. Convoys halted. Highways cut. Fuel trucks burned like funeral pyres on the roadside. Businesses closed their shutters, bus stations emptied, and the rhythm of a city that once pulsed with life slowed to a suffocating crawl. Nim's message was clear: we control the roads. We control the capital's breath. For a landlocked nation, the highways are arteries. Without them, no fuel, no food, no medicine can flow. Without them, Bamako gasps. And in that gasp, the terrorists sought victory. The economic toll was immediate. International buses stopped running. Goods piled up at borders. Prices spiked, leaving families scrambling. A taxi driver said it bluntly: we don't fear bullets. We fear running out of bread. Social media carried the images, drivers forced to abandon their cargo. Flames devouring tankers, masked men with rifles standing guard at makeshift checkpoints. Analysts warned that the perception of power had shifted, the government spoke of control. But the streets told another story. Not the state, but Al-Qaeda rules here, some whispered. This was more than war. This was asphyxiation. Yet, in Bamako, another message was being prepared. FAMa was not ready to let the capital suffocate. The army understood the symbolism: if Bamako fell silent, all of Mali would echo that silence. If Bamako stood, the nation would stand with it. And so, the counteroffensive began. It started with airstrikes near Diama and Nyoro, targeting Al-Qaeda fighters who had sought to choke fuel imports. Explosions lit up the night. A reminder that the skies still belonged to Mali. Reports confirmed, dozens of militants killed, supply routes disrupted. More importantly, captives were freed, hostages who had been dragged into the bush returned home under the cover of soldiers. But it did not stop there. Patrols tightened around the capital. Checkpoints once manned by terrorists were replaced with uniformed men of FAMa. Roads reopened, cautiously at first, then steadily. The lifelines of Bamako began to pulse again. For the people, the change was tangible. A merchant at the central market said, when the army returned, the city could breathe again. A mother recalled how her children no longer asked if they would eat tomorrow, but when. This battle was not only about securing supplies. It was about reclaiming dignity. To show that Bamako was not hostage to fear. That the capital was not a pawn in the hands of foreign-backed insurgents. Still, the danger loomed. Every convoy could be attacked, every road could be cut again. The fight was constant. Like a heartbeat under stress. Yet, every successful delivery, every reopened shop, every bus that left the terminal was defiance. To walk through Bamako today is to feel resilience layered over fragility. Streets crowded again, children in schoolyards, taxis honking through traffic jams. But under it all, the awareness lingers, the blockade could return. The heart could be strangled once more. And that is why presence matters. Soldiers at checkpoints are not just guardians of roads. They are guardians of trust. Each salute to a driver is more than formality, it is assurance that the capital will not be abandoned. Bamako is not only a city. It is a symbol. If it breathes, Mali breathes. And for every soldier who fell in defense of its roads, every family who endured hunger during its blockade, the symbol has become personal. So the struggle continues. Terrorists will try again. But so will the army. And between them stands the people, resilient, watchful, refusing to let fear define their future. If you believe that Bamako deserves to live free, that no capital should ever be strangled by terror, then speak. Leave your thoughts. Because silence is what the enemy feeds on. And silence is what Mali refuses to give. The twist in Mali's war is this: the enemy no longer needs to win every battle with bullets. They have discovered a weapon more subtle, more devastating: control over the arteries of life. By blockading highways, torching fuel convoys, and spreading fear through radio propaganda, JNIM sought to strangle Mali without firing a shot. They turned hunger into a siege, fuel shortages into panic, and whispers of abandonment into political paralysis. It was a war not against soldiers, but against confidence itself. In K's, families hesitated to travel. Not because of gunfire, but because of rumors that roads were cursed by ambushes. In Bamako, taxi drivers refused passengers, not because of broken cars, but because gasoline had vanished from pumps. In Kidal, mothers rationed food, not because of failed harvests, but because convoys had been stolen in the desert. This was psychological warfare at its purest. The aim was not to kill bodies, but to convince minds that Mali was ungovernable, that the state had disappeared, that terror was the only reality. But here lies the true twist: every blockade, every burned truck, every whisper of fear became an opportunity for the army to redefine sovereignty. When soldiers escorted convoys, they were not only guarding cargo. They were declaring, "We can secure not just land, but life." When airstrikes freed hostages, they were not only rescuing people. They were proving the state is still present. When markets reopened, they were not only selling food. They were selling hope. And hope is contagious. For years, Mali was portrayed as fragile, fractured, waiting for outside saviors. But in this crucible, the people themselves became witnesses of resilience. They saw that sovereignty was not an abstract word. It was a soldier saluting a driver, a mother holding rice, a child waving at a patrol truck. The twist of Mali's war is that victory will not be measured in territories captured or terrorists killed, but in the refusal to surrender breath itself. Terrorists wanted silence. Instead, Mali gave them defiance. This is why the battle for Mali matters far beyond its borders. Because every blockade here is a test for Africa. Can a people reclaim sovereignty not only with guns, but with grain, fuel, and faith? If you believe that the greatest weapon against fear is unity, let your voice join the story. Speak, comment, share. For silence is the shadow the enemy craves, and silence is the one gift Mali will never surrender. Mali's story is not one of surrender. It is the story of a nation that faced hunger, fear, and silence, and chose to fight back with courage, unity, and hope. From the gold roads of K's to the hungry streets of Kidal, to the besieged heart of Bamako, the message has remained the same: Mali will not kneel. Not to bullets, not to blockades, not to terror. What rises in Mali today is more than an army's resilience. It is a people's defiance. A nation declaring to the world, sovereignty is not for sale, freedom is not negotiable. This is not only Mali's fight. It is Africa's symbol. For every blockade broken, for every convoy protected, for every child who eats because soldiers stood guard, the continent learns that sovereignty is possible, and it is worth everything. If the spirit of Mali has touched you, do not let it fade. Like, comment, and subscribe. Add your voice to this movement. Because today, the soldiers of Mali carry the flame. But tomorrow, it is our turn to keep that flame burning. Together, we will ensure it never dies.